She was a broken artist, forced to forge lies, trapped in a gilded gallery where her soul bled. Her desperation led to a catastrophic collision, spilling wine on a stranger who saw past her terror to a hidden fire. He was Luca Conti, a ruthless mafia don, now her partner in the very gallery exploiting her. When her tormentor pushed too far, destroying her art and snatching her away, Luca unleashed a brutal citywide hunt, not just to save her life, but to claim her art, her soul, and her very being. She never asked for his dangerous protection, but could she survive without his obsessive love? The first sliver of dawn, a weak, diluted gray, rarely offered solace in Emily's cramped apartment. It merely served to highlight the accumulating dust motes dancing in the stale air and the faint, persistent scent of cheap instant coffee clinging to the worn fabric of her sofa. She stirred on the narrow mattress laid directly on the floor, her body protesting the lack of support, a dull ache blooming in her lower back. Her eyes, still heavy with the exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure, drifted towards the easel tucked away in the corner. A pristine white canvas stared back, mocking her. It had been weeks, perhaps months, since she dared to touch it with anything more than a fleeting, longing glance. The brushes, stiff with dried paint, lay abandoned in a chipped ceramic mug, silent witnesses to her artistic stagnation. A bitter taste, more than just the residue of morning breath, coated her tongue. It was the taste of unfulfilled dreams, of compromise, of a life being meticulously unraveled by forces far beyond her control. Emily swung her legs over the side of the mattress, the chill of the bare floorboards seeping through the thin cotton of her pajamas. The small space, barely large enough to hold her meager belongings, felt less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated prison cell. Every object, from the stack of dog-eared art history books to the single, wilting potted plant on the windowsill, whispered reminders of the aspiring artist she once was and the corporate pawn she had become. The Thorn Gallery. The name itself was an opulent cage, its golden bars invisible but undeniably present. It gleamed on the polished brass plaque outside, a beacon of refined taste and exquisite art, but for Emily, it was a mausoleum for her spirit. She was a junior curator, a title that sounded far grander than the reality. Her days were a monotonous blur of cataloging, arranging, and, increasingly, fabricating. Mr. Alistair Thorne, the gallery's owner, was a man carved from old money and ruthless ambition. His presence alone was enough to curdle the air, a blend of expensive cologne and an almost palpable aura of quiet menace. Emily dressed quickly, pulling on the crisp white blouse and tailored black skirt that formed her daily uniform. The fabric felt restrictive, a physical manifestation of the chains binding her. As she fastened the tiny pearl buttons, her reflection in the smudged mirror stared back, tired eyes, a faint bruise of exhaustion under them, but also a flicker of something defiant, stubbornly alive. She ran a hand through her loosely braided auburn hair, wishing for a moment of quiet, of peace, before stepping out into the cacophony of the city. But peace was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the weight of her younger sister, Clara's medical bills pressing down on her shoulders. Clara's fragile health, her constant need for expensive medication and specialized care, was the true tether that bound Emily to Thorne's dark world. The gallery, usually a hushed sanctuary of hushed whispers and reverent gazes, felt particularly heavy that morning. The scent of polished wood and aged canvas mingled with the faint, metallic tang of anxiety that always clung to Emily. She walked through the grand halls, past masterpieces that once inspired her, now tainted by the knowledge of what lurked beneath their gilded frames. Her first task was to prepare a new acquisition for display, a seemingly authentic Rococo portrait. Her stomach clenched. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was a flawless forgery, one of many Thorne had acquired and planned to slip into the legitimate market. She'd seen the subtle discrepancies, the tiny anachronisms that only a trained artist's eye, a true lover of the craft, would catch. But her job wasn't to expose, it was to facilitate. This isn't me, she thought, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the lighting. This isn't what I went to art school for. The internal monologue was a constant, gnawing companion, a desperate plea from her artistic soul. She remembered the exhilaration of her early days, the smell of turpentine and oil paints, the way a blank canvas held endless possibilities. Now each authentic piece she handled felt like a silent accusation, each forgery a betrayal of her deepest values. A sharp, demanding voice cut through her thoughts. "Emily, my office now." It was Mr. Thorne. His voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable authority, a predatory edge that sent a shiver down her spine. He rarely summoned her directly unless there was an urgent and usually illicit matter to discuss. She found him behind his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of dark wood and polished brass. The room itself reeked of old money and new secrets, the rich, leathery scent of antique books, the faint, metallic smell of fresh ink on dubious documents. He didn't look up from the tablet in his hands, his eyes, like cold chips of obsidian, scanning what appeared to be a financial report. His expensive suit, perfectly tailored, seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more imposing. "Close the door, Emily," he murmured, his tone devoid of warmth. "We have a new opportunity that requires your unique talents." Emily's breath hitched. She knew what that meant. Another forgery. Another piece of her soul chipped away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. She desperately wanted to refuse, to walk out, to scream the truth about his illicit dealings. But then the image of Clara, pale and coughing in her hospital bed, flashed behind her eyes, a visceral punch to her gut. The cold fear, sharp and immediate, paralyzed her. She couldn't abandon Clara. Not yet. Not ever. She was trapped, bound by threads of love, debt, and desperation, caught in Mr. Thorne's meticulously woven web. The air in the opulent office thickened, suffocating her. She swallowed, her throat dry, knowing that whatever opportunity Thorne presented, it would only drag her deeper into the abyss she so desperately yearned to escape. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, hoping he wouldn't hear the tremor that betrayed her terror. She was a lamb walking willingly into the lion's den, but for Clara, she would endure any humiliation, any compromise. She just didn't know how much longer she could pretend to be someone she wasn't. And she definitely didn't know how much longer she could keep the raging artist inside her from breaking free. The air in the private auction room was thick, not just with the scent of aged canvas and expensive perfume, but with a palpable tension that vibrated just beneath the surface of hushed whispers and polite smiles. Chandeliers, heavy with crystal, glittered, casting a deceptive warmth over the gathering of the city's elite. Emily, a phantom among the shadows, moved with practiced grace, serving canapes and refilling champagne flutes. Each forced smile felt like a physical ache on her lips. Her black uniform, designed to blend into the background, did little to shield her from the oppressive weight of her role tonight. Her eyes, however, weren't on the guests or the shimmering artwork. They were fixed, with a growing sense of dread, on the velvet-draped pedestal at the center of the room. A new piece was about to be unveiled, the evening's main attraction, touted as a rediscovered masterpiece by a lesser-known Renaissance artist. But Emily knew better. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, a familiar, sickening twist. This wasn't merely a forgery. It was the forgery. The one she'd been forced to subtly approve in the gallery's inventory, her signature a silent, damning lie on the provenance papers. Mr. Thorne had called it her contribution to the gallery's growth. She'd called it a piece of her soul dying. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like polished mahogany, began his smooth practice patter. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the crown jewel of tonight's collection, Emily felt a sudden chill, despite the crowded room. She knew the original, knew its flaws, its brushstrokes, its very essence. And she knew, with an artist's undeniable instinct, that the one beneath the velvet shroud was a cunning, insidious replica. Selling it was not just a crime against art, but a personal betrayal. If this went through, her complicity would be irreversible, a stain on her conscience far worse than any debt. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. Her breath hitched. She had to do something. Anything. But what? Exposing it would mean exposing herself, ruining her, destroying any fragile hope of Clara's continued care. Yet, letting it happen felt like surrendering completely to Thorne's darkness. Her mind raced, a frantic hummingbird trapped in a glass room. There had to be a way. A desperate, impossible way. Her gaze darted around the room, searching, grasping. There, on a small ornate table tucked into an alcove, lay a stack of glossy auction catalogs, pristine and thick. One of them, she remembered, contained a subtle, easily overlooked printing error on the page describing the real painting's history, a detail only someone intimately familiar with the original artist would ever notice. If she could just highlight it, make it obvious, create doubt. It was a long shot, a reckless idea, but it was all she had. Without thinking, driven by a surge of desperate, unbridled defiance, Emily moved. She pushed through the throng of guests, the murmurs of anticipation around the pedestal growing louder, more urgent. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the elegant classical music playing softly in the background. Her hands, usually steady, now trembled with a mix of fear and an almost reckless abandon. She clutched the edge of a passing waiter's tray, narrowly avoiding a collision, her focus solely on the catalogs. Then a sudden solid wall of dark fabric. A fleeting scent of expensive leather and a masculine cologne, sharp and intoxicating, hit her nostrils. A soft oof escaped her lips as she slammed directly into something, or someone, impossibly still amidst the surging crowd. A choked gasp escaped her as a crystal glass, held precariously on the edge of her tray, tipped. Red liquid, dark and glistening, bloomed across the tailored front of a man's black suit. Time seemed to slow. The rich, ruby color spread like a violent stain, a horrifying splash against the stark perfection of the fabric. Emily froze, her body rigid with a fresh wave of terror that eclipsed even her desperate mission. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice thin and high, laced with genuine horror. I wasn't looking. I can get a cloth, I can." The man stood unmoving. A towering figure, broader than she'd expected, emanating an aura of quiet, contained power that silenced her frantic apologies. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. Slowly, he lowered his hand from where it had been casually resting in his pocket, revealing strong, elegant fingers that seemed far too refined for any ordinary man. His head, dark hair slicked back with an almost ruthless precision, tilted just slightly. And then he looked at her. Luca Conti. The name, whispered in hushed tones throughout the city's underbelly, was rarely spoken aloud in circles like these. But Emily, even in her shock, recognized him from the scattered, grainy newspaper photos Mr. Thorne obsessively kept. He was more imposing in person, a raw, undeniable force of nature disguised in bespoke tailoring. His eyes, the color of deep, unfathomable shadows, bore into hers. They weren't angry, not with the furious, explosive rage she'd braced herself for. Instead, they were cold, assessing, and disturbingly seeing. His gaze didn't linger on the wine stain, though it marred the expensive fabric. It plunged straight into her, bypassing the frantic apologies, the clumsy posture, piercing through her facade of a humble gallery assistant. He saw the genuine terror in her wide eyes, the underlying desperation that had propelled her headlong into him. He saw the flicker of defiance, the raw vulnerability, the utter misery that her carefully constructed composure usually hid. It was a silent, predatory assessment, yet laced with an unsettling intensity that made her entire body prickle. "Are you all right, Piccola?" His voice. It was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within her chest, not a question of concern, but a quiet, dangerous observation. It held a subtle accent, a hint of something ancient and powerful, a language not meant for polite society. Emily could only manage a shaky nod. Her throat felt tight, constricted. She was suffocating under his gaze, yet a strange, almost illicit thrill shot through her veins. In a room full of people, he saw only her. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, their eyes locked. It was more than just eye contact. It was an electric current, a silent conversation passing between two strangers. A spark ignited, a dangerous, forbidden flame. He was a predator, a powerful one, and she was undeniably his prey. But there was something else in his gaze too, a flicker of recognition, a quiet intensity that hinted at something deeper than mere annoyance or even attraction. It was like he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for, something precious and fragile amidst the lies and glittering deceit. A low murmur from the auctioneer broke the spell. Unveiling our magnificent acquisition, Luca's eyes never left hers, even as Marco, his silent, hulking bodyguard, materialized seemingly from nowhere to offer a crisp white cloth for the wine stain. Luca barely acknowledged him, his focus singular on Emily. "It seems you have other concerns," he murmured, his eyes still holding hers captive, a subtle curve playing on the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile, not exactly. More like a promise. Or a threat. A quiet, knowing acknowledgement of the turmoil raging within her. Emily felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. The world, which had moments ago been about a forgery and a desperate plan, had narrowed to just him. His scent, his gaze, the unsettling depth of his presence. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her clumsy collision had done more than just spill wine. It had thrust her directly into the path of a powerful man, and she had no idea if he would be her salvation or her ultimate ruin. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sharp crack, announcing the start of the bidding, but Emily heard nothing, lost in the overwhelming presence of Luca Conti. The forgery was the least of her worries now. She had just collided with something far more dangerous. The air in Mr. Thorne's office still clung to Emily, a suffocating blend of stale ambition and the cloying scent of fear. He had, with chilling precision, laid bare the extent of his reach. Not just her debt, which had ballooned to an astronomical sum, but Clara's precarious health, her fragile existence now a weapon in his polished hand. A seemingly innocuous phone call to Clara's hospital, intercepted by Emily's terrified ears, had conveyed a veiled threat of a minor administrative oversight that could delay critical medication, a sudden complication in her care. The casual cruelty in Thorne's voice, the way he watched her face drain of color, was a devastating blow. He wasn't just threatening her livelihood, he was threatening her very reason for living. "I have a new project for you, Emily," he purred, leaning back in his leather chair, his eyes like dead fish. "A special commission. It requires your unique flair for blending the old with the new. Something subtly grand, yet with a modern sensibility. It will be the centerpiece of our autumn gala. And it will require your undivided attention." He hadn't needed to mention the money laundering aspect. Emily knew. She knew the carefully structured transactions, the shell companies, the anonymous buyers. Her artistic vision, once a source of pride, was now a tool for his illicit empire. The next few days blurred into a monotonous cycle of artistic prostitution. Emily spent hours in a secluded, locked studio within the gallery, forcing herself to channel her talent into creating a piece that felt inherently wrong. The canvas, a vast expanse of white, seemed to mock her artistic soul. Each stroke of the brush felt like a betrayal. The rich smell of oil paints, once comforting, now sickened her. She worked under the oppressive weight of Thorne's expectations, his veiled threats echoing in her mind with every stroke. Clara's face, pale and beloved, was her only shield against utter collapse. Then the gifts began. The first was a heavy, leather-bound volume, a first edition on Renaissance chiaroscuro, delivered to her apartment door by a silent, impeccably dressed man who offered no explanation, merely a fleeting, almost imperceptible nod. Emily stared at the package, her heart thumping a bewildered rhythm. No name, no card, just the book gleaming with a dark, expensive allure. She ran her fingers over the aged leather, a strange mix of suspicion and curiosity prickling her skin. Who would send such a thing? And why? 2 days later, a chilled cooler appeared. Inside, Nestled amongst layers of ice were glistening oysters, a rare imported cheese, and a bottle of vintage Sauvignon Blanc, delicacies far beyond her meager salary. Again, no Cinder. Just the silent deliverer man, his eyes briefly meeting hers before he vanished into the bustling street. Emily's stomach twisted. Was this a warning? A veiled message from Thorn? Or something else entirely? A shiver, not of fear, but of an unsettling intrigue, traced its way down her spine. The food was too exquisite to discard, too peculiar to ignore. She eventually succumbed, tasting the wine, the sharp notes a brief respite from her gnawing anxieties. Her mind, however, kept returning to Luca Conti. That intense, piercing gaze in the auction room. The way he hadn't cared about the wine, only about her. Was it him? The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. He was a dangerous man, a force of nature. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was a force that could crack the walls of her gilded cage. Driven by a desperate, if naive, hope, Emily tried to seek help. She made an appointment with a public defender she'd found online, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Davies. The lawyer's office was drab, smelling of old paper and lukewarm coffee, a stark contrast to Thorne's opulent world. Emily, with a trembling voice, laid out her predicament: the debt, Thorne's exploitation of her art, the veiled threats to Clara. Ms. Davies listened patiently, her brow furrowed. But as Emily finished, the lawyer shook her head, a sympathetic but utterly defeated look on her face. Emily, I understand your situation, but Mr. Thorne, he's powerful. His connections run deep. Your contracts, even if coerced, are legally binding. And without concrete, undeniable proof of his illegal activities, which he would have meticulously buried, pursuing this would be incredibly difficult and potentially dangerous for you. For your sister. The words landed like lead weights in Emily's stomach. So, there's nothing, she whispered, her voice cracking. Not that I can see legally, Ms. Davies said, her voice soft with regret. He's built his empire too carefully. He has too much leverage over you. Emily walked out of the law office feeling heavier than when she'd walked in. The flimsy shield of legal recourse had crumbled, leaving her exposed. The city streets, once a blur of anonymous faces, now felt filled with watchful eyes. She started noticing things. A dark sedan parked down the street from her apartment for longer than seemed normal. The same man, unremarkable in every way, sitting in a cafe across from the gallery 2 mornings in a row, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours. Was it paranoia, born from Thorne's threats? Or was it something more? One evening, as she returned from a late night working on Thorne's commission, she found another package at her door. This time, it wasn't a book or food. It was a single, perfect white orchid, its petals almost translucent, pristine and delicate. Tucked into the pot was a small, elegant card. No words, just a symbol she recognized from an obscure art history text, the stylized serpent coiling around a paintbrush. Luca Conti's family crest. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, shot through her. It was him. He wasn't just observing. He was actively intruding into her life, leaving these silent, potent markers. He was a predator, yes, but these weren't the typical threats of a criminal. They were gestures of a dangerous fascination, a possessive attention. The orchid, so beautiful and pure, felt like a silent claim. Emily clutched the pot to her chest, the delicate petals a cool comfort against her racing heart. The confusion mingled with a strange, unsettling allure. She was a fly caught in 2 dangerous webs, Thorne's suffocating deceit and Luca Conti's enigmatic, predatory gaze. And as she brought the orchid inside, placing it carefully on her windowsill, a strange thought crystallized in her mind. She was trapped, yes. But perhaps, just perhaps, this new, powerful web might offer a different kind of captivity, one that promised not just ruin, but a dangerous, compelling escape. She looked out at the city lights, the faint glint of the dark sedan still visible down the street. Luca was watching. and a terrifying, alluring part of her found herself waiting for his next move. The announcement hit Emily with the force of a physical blow, yet she maintained a perfectly composed smile, a mask she had perfected over months of silent suffering. Mr. Thorne, his usually pinched features almost radiating a smug satisfaction, stood before the gallery staff, a rare, almost celebratory gleam in his cold eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the hushed space of the main hall, "it is with great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed new partner, Mr. Luca Conti. His discerning eye and a substantial investment will propel Thorne Gallery into an even more illustrious future." A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the staff. Emily felt her blood run cold, then hot, then a confusing blend of both. Luca Conti. The name reverberated in her mind, a dangerous melody. She hadn't seen him since their jarring collision at the auction, but his image, his scent, the memory of his unsettling gaze had been a constant, intrusive presence in her thoughts. Now he was here, in the gallery, not as a discreet client, but as a partner. The walls of her cage, already so constricting, had just tightened further, woven with threads of an even more potent danger. Luca emerged from the shadows of Thorne's office, a vision of effortless, predatory elegance. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, a dark silk tie a subtle contrast against his crisp white shirt. The subtle scent of his cologne, sharp and undeniably masculine, reached her even from across the room, wrapping around her senses like a physical embrace. He moved with a quiet, almost feline grace, his presence so commanding it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. He offered Thorne a brief, almost imperceptible nod, then his eyes, those deep, fathomless pools, swept across the assembled staff. They paused, just for a beat too long, when they landed on Emily. A tiny, involuntary shiver traced its way down her spine. It was a familiar sensation now, this primal response to his gaze. A mixture of fear, fascination, and something else entirely, a strange, electric current that ignited a dangerous spark deep within her. He offered no smile, no conventional acknowledgement, simply held her gaze for a moment that stretched into an eternity, a silent, potent communication passing between them. Then, with a subtle shift, his eyes moved on, but the impression, the feeling of being intensely seen lingered. Over the next few weeks, Luca's presence became an undeniable, constant force in the gallery. He wasn't merely an absent investor. He was present. His office, previously a rarely used guest suite, was now a hub of quiet, intense activity. His deep, resonant voice became a frequent, if hushed, sound in the hallways, often in terse, foreign conversations over the phone. Emily found herself constantly aware of him, the faint click of his expensive shoes on the marble, the distant murmur of his commands, the subtle shift in the atmosphere when he entered a room. Their daily encounters were unavoidable. She would see him in the mornings, walking through the main hall, his expression unreadable, often accompanied by Marco, his silent, watchful shadow. Sometimes their paths would cross in the display rooms or during staff meetings. Each time his eyes would find hers, holding her captive for a fraction of a second, a silent, intense stare that bypassed all pleasantries and burrowed directly into her soul. She would feel a flush creep up her neck, a nervous flutter in her stomach, even as she forced herself to meet his gaze with a practiced neutrality. One afternoon, while she was meticulously dusting a delicate porcelain sculpture, Luca appeared beside her, seemingly from nowhere. The sudden proximity made her jump, a tiny gasp escaping her lips. "Apologies," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly sound that resonated in the quiet room. "I didn't mean to startle you." He stood too close, the heat of his body a palpable presence beside her. She could smell his cologne again, a complex blend of oud and sandalwood, sophisticated and subtly dangerous. Her hand, still clutching the feather duster, trembled slightly. "It's quite all right, Mr. Conti," she managed, her voice a little breathless. She kept her eyes fixed on the sculpture, afraid to meet his. "The work of a true artisan," he said, his gaze fixed on the porcelain, yet Emily felt the weight of his attention still heavily on her. "Delicate, fragile, easily broken. His voice was a soft, almost intimate murmur, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't talking about the sculpture at all. Her fingers tightened on the duster handle. Yes, she whispered, her throat dry. It requires careful handling. He let out a low, almost imperceptible hum, a sound that sent a strange warmth through her. Indeed. Then his hand, strong and undeniably masculine, reached out. Not to touch her, but to gently brush a speck of dust from the pedestal beside her. His fingertips, rough yet precise, grazed her bare arm for a fleeting second, sending a jolt of pure electricity through her. It was so brief, so seemingly accidental, yet it felt deliberate, a silent claim. Emily's breath hitched. She instinctively pulled back, but the sensation, the phantom warmth of his touch, lingered on her skin. Later that week, he summoned her to his new office, a stark, minimalist space that somehow felt more intimidating than Thorne's gilded cage. He wanted her opinion, he claimed, on a new acquisition or a series of abstract paintings that had just arrived. Emily, nervous but also undeniably intrigued, walked into the room, the scent of fresh paint and Luca's distinct cologne mingling in the air. He was standing by the large window overlooking the bustling city, his back to her. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Come, tell me what you see." He gestured to a canvas, a chaotic explosion of dark blues and reds. Most critics find it unsettling. Too raw. Emily, surprised by his vulnerability, found herself speaking with an unusual candor. "It's not meant to be comfortable, Mr. Conti. It's meant to be felt. It's the artist screaming." She explained the artist's turbulent history, the hidden symbolism she discovered in her research, the raw emotion that bled through each brushstroke. As she spoke, her passion, long suppressed, began to surface. Luca listened, his posture relaxed, his dark eyes fixed on her. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer a dismissive comment. He simply absorbed her words, his expression shifting, softening. "You see beneath the surface," he murmured, his voice a low appreciation. "You understand the agony." She flushed, suddenly self-conscious. "It's my job to understand art." He took a step closer, his eyes intense. "No, Emily. It is your soul that understands it. Your soul that bleeds with it. The one that still tries to create, even when trapped." His words were a direct hit, a shocking revelation that he saw not just the curator, but the struggling artist, the caged bird. He saw her. The intimacy of his perception made her heart pound, a frantic, exhilarating rhythm. The dangerous chemistry between them continued to escalate, a silent hum beneath the polished veneer of the gallery. Emily found herself increasingly drawn to his intensity. His quiet attentiveness, the way he seemed to hear her unspoken thoughts, was intoxicating. She was terrified, yes, but also undeniably fascinated. This man, a walking paradox of power and unexpected sensitivity, was chipping away at her defenses, revealing a longing she hadn't dared to acknowledge. One afternoon, Mr. Thorne was entertaining a wealthy, flamboyant art collector, a man known for his obnoxious flirtations. He cornered Emily by a display of Greek antiquities, his hand lingering on her arm a little too long as he praised her exquisite taste. Emily forced a polite, strained smile, trying to subtly pull away. From across the room, Luca watched. His face remained impassive, but Emily saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. His body, previously relaxed against a marble pillar, stiffened. The air around him seemed to crackle, with an unspoken warning. Before the collector could make another suggestive comment, Luca detached himself from his conversation, moving with deliberate, unhurried steps towards Emily. He didn't speak to the collector. He didn't even look at him. He simply stopped beside Emily, his body a solid, immovable barrier between her and the man, effectively cutting off the collector's access. His hand, warm and firm, settled briefly on the small of her back, a possessive gesture that was both subtle and undeniable. "Emily," he said, his voice a low, commanding murmur meant only for her. Mr. Thorne requires your immediate attention in the main vault. He wishes for you to supervise the relocation of the Caravaggio. The Caravaggio, one of the gallery's most valuable, immovable pieces, wasn't going anywhere. It was a clear, silent order. A swift, devastating power play. The collector, sensing the unspoken menace, quickly retreated with a mumbled apology. Emily's heart hammered. She knew what Luca had done. He had seen. He had acted. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Fear of his possessiveness, but also a strange primal sense of security. He had protected her, claimed her, in his own dangerous way. As they walked towards the vault, the long, silent corridor suddenly feeling impossibly small, Luca's hand remained gently on her back, his fingers subtly tracing patterns on the fabric of her uniform. "Are you quite all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost tender. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." His gaze intensified, a deep, unsettling burn that promised both protection and a profound, all-consuming claim. "Good," he murmured, his thumb brushing lightly, sensuously, against her skin. "Because from now on, Piccola, you will only be touched by hands you choose. And those that protect you." The implication hung heavy in the air, a silken thread of warning and a promise of a dangerous devotion. Emily's breath hitched. She knew she was falling headlong into his powerful, inescapable orbit, even as a tiny, terrified part of her wondered if she would ever truly be free. The special commission painting loomed over Emily, a vast, oppressive canvas in the locked studio Mr. Thorne had assigned her. The rich, earthy scent of linseed oil and turpentine, usually a comfort, now felt like a toxic gas burning in her lungs. She stared at the intricate design Thorne had approved, a complex web of classical figures intertwined with modern geometric patterns, a perfect, soulless blend of old and new for his nefarious purposes. Her brush hovered, heavy with expensive ultramarine, but her hand stalled. A defiant tremor ran through her. She couldn't do it. Not completely. A tiny, insidious seed of rebellion, dormant for too long, began to sprout. Thorne had provided precise instructions for every layer, every pigment, every hidden signature meant to authenticate the fraud years down the line. But what if one tiny detail, one crucial element, was subtly, almost imperceptibly off? Not enough to be immediately noticed, but enough to create a flaw, a subtle disruption in his perfectly orchestrated scheme. Her eyes flickered to a small, obscure detail in Thorne's sketched blueprint, a delivery of rare, antique Venetian glass beads, meant to be incorporated into a jewel-encrusted crown on one of the figures. The beads were crucial for the authenticity. Emily's breath hitched. She remembered the delivery schedule. A small, treacherous smile touched her lips. She could misplace the order form, delaying their arrival, causing a ripple in Thorne's tightly controlled timeline. It was a minuscule act, a drop in the ocean of his corruption, but it was her defiance. Her small, desperate fight back. With a furtive glance at the surveillance camera tucked into the corner, a constant, chilling reminder of Thorne's watchful eye, she acted. Not with her brush, but with a swift, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist, sending the carefully labeled delivery manifest with the Venetian beads tumbling behind a heavy stack of canvases. Out of sight, out of mind, until the delay became too apparent to ignore. A pulse of adrenaline, exhilarating and terrifying, shot through her. It was a fleeting, hollow victory, but for a moment she felt a sliver of her old self, the artist who dared to challenge. That night, exhaustion clung to Emily like a second skin. The bus ride home was a blur of fluorescent lights and faceless commuters. The chill of the late autumn air bit at her exposed skin, a harsh reminder of her vulnerability. Her apartment building, a tired brick structure on a noisy street, offered little comfort. As she fumbled with her keys, a sense of unease pricked at her. The lock felt different, looser. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. The door swung inward with a faint, sickening groan. A cold gust of wind, smelling of damp earth and something acrid, swept through the entryway. Her breath hitched. The apartment was dark, but even in the murky light filtering from the hallway, she knew. A gasp, raw and terrified, tore from her throat. Her small world had been brutally, systematically violated. Canvases, previously stacked neatly against the wall, were slashed, gaping wounds in their pristine surfaces. Paints, her precious, dwindling supply, were squeezed onto the floor, vibrant colors mingling into a grotesque, meaningless mess. Her easel lay overturned, its wooden legs splintered. Books, her cherished companions, were torn, pages scattered like fallen leaves across the floor. The air thrummed with a palpable scent of disruption, of malevolent presence. Her knees buckled. She felt a profound, devastating sense of violation, of her last sanctuary defiled. Then a low, guttural growl from the shadows. Emily froze, every muscle in her body locking. Her eyes, wide with terror, strained against the darkness. A hulking silhouette detached itself from the deeper gloom near her bedroom door. Mr. Thorne's enforcer. She'd seen him before, a silent, menacing presence around a gallery, his face a brutal mask of indifference. Thorne sent his regards. The man rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly threat that vibrated through the small apartment. The coldness in his eyes was absolute, a void. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her, and Emily instinctively recoiled, stumbling backwards over a pile of ruined sketches. Her breath caught in her throat, a terrified whimper trapped behind her lips. He doesn't appreciate delays. The enforcer continued, his heavy footsteps echoing menacingly on the bare floor. And he especially doesn't appreciate little artists trying to play games. His hand shot out, a brutal vice closing around her arm. His grip was shockingly strong, pulling her forward, twisting her wrist. Pain, sharp and immediate, flared up her arm. She cried out, a small, desperate sound. "This is a warning," he hissed, his face inches from hers, the stale scent of tobacco and something metallic assaulting her senses. "Next time, the target won't be your pretty paintings. It'll be your pretty face. Or your sister." The last word was a whisper, a venomous snake striking at her deepest fear. Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring his already menacing features. She struggled, her small frame no match for his brute strength, her terrified whimpers useless. The reality of her situation, the sheer suffocating danger, crashed down on her. This wasn't just about debt or art anymore. This was about survival. Just as a fresh wave of despair threatened to consume her, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the hallway outside. It was a sound of splintering wood, followed by a muffled grunt. The enforcer, his grip still tight on Emily, paused, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. He turned his head slightly, listening. Then, swift as a shadow, a figure materialized in the doorway, blocking the dim hallway light. Marco, Luca Conti's silent, imposing bodyguard. His face was impassive, but his eyes, usually stoic, held a dangerous, unyielding glint. Behind him, two more dark figures, moving with unsettling synchronization, slipped into the apartment, their presence silent but overwhelming. Before the enforcer could react, Marco moved. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. A blur of motion, a swift, brutal strike to the enforcer's neck, then a sickening thud as his body crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The entire encounter lasted mere seconds, executed with chilling precision. Emily, still trembling, stared in shock at the crumpled form, her arm aching from the residual grip. Marco turned to her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Signorina," he said, his voice deep and calm, a stark contrast to the violence he had just wrought. "Are you harmed?" He didn't wait for an answer, his eyes scanning her arm, her face a quick, efficient assessment. Emily could only shake her head, too stunned to speak, tears still streaming down her face, a confusing mix of terror and profound, overwhelming relief. The immediate threat was gone, vanished in a flash of Luca's unseen power. She was safe. For now. The Don has been made aware of the incident, Marco continued, his gaze unwavering. He insisted on immediate resolution and relocation. He gestured towards the door. We have a secure location ready. You will be comfortable there. All your needs will be met. Your sister, she's also being monitored. Safely. The mention of Clara, handled with such casual, terrifying efficiency, sent another wave of shivers through her. Luca knew. He had seen everything. He had acted. Emily was no longer merely a pawn in Thorne's game. She was now a piece on Luca Conti's chessboard, intricately protected, undeniably claimed. The realization was a dizzying mix of fear and a strange, dawning admiration. His ruthlessness was absolute, his protection fierce. She looked at her ruined apartment, the shattered remnants of her defiance. Then at Marco, his formidable presence a shield. The danger was real, far more brutal than she had imagined. But so was the protection. And for the first time, Emily felt a powerful, if terrifying, surge of dependence on a man she barely knew. A man who moved in shadows but now cast his formidable light directly on her. She was on a terrifying, emotional roller coaster, strapped in, unable to get off. The journey had just begun, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life would never be her own again. She was under the Dawn's protection, a gilded prisoner in a new, more dangerous cage. The secure location was not a dungeon, nor a fortress in the brutal sense. It was a penthouse suite, perched high above the city, a testament to Luca Conti's immeasurable wealth and his unsettling attention to detail. Emily stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering tapestry of urban lights, a stark contrast to the destruction she'd left behind. The apartment smelled of fresh linen, expensive leather, and a faint, lingering trace of Luca's cologne, a scent that now seemed to follow her everywhere, both a comfort and a constant, potent reminder of her gilded captivity. Her old apartment, her life as she knew it, was gone, erased. The violence of Thorne's enforcer, the casual brutality of the ransacking, still vibrated in her bones. But Luca had swept in, a force of nature, clearing the debris of her shattered world and placing her here, in this opulent, yet undeniably caged sanctuary. Clara, she'd been assured, was under constant, discreet supervision, her medical needs met with an efficiency that bordered on the terrifying. This fact, more than anything, kept Emily from succumbing to outright despair. She was safe, truly safe, for the first time in months. But at what cost? The silence of the penthouse was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the frantic thrumming of her own heart. She walked through the spacious living area, her bare feet sinking into plush, cream-colored rugs. Her few salvaged belongings, along with new clothes and rich, soft fabrics, were neatly arranged in a vast walk-in closet. It was all a testament to Luca's control, his meticulous orchestration. She was a bird in a golden cage, with infinitely softer perches. The internal conflict raged within her, a tormenting storm. Gratitude wrestled with fear, relief with a chilling awareness of Luca's ruthlessness. She had witnessed his power firsthand, the swift, brutal efficacy of his command. He was a dangerous man, a mob boss, a figure of shadowy authority. Yet he had saved her. He had protected Clara. And in his eyes, she had seen something that transcended mere power, a possessive intensity that felt both terrifying and undeniably, disturbingly alluring. She found him later that evening in the apartment's private study, a room lined with dark wood and filled with ancient books. He was seated in a leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the city lights reflecting in its depths. His posture was relaxed, yet every line of his body spoke of coiled strength, of an alertness that never truly rested. The subtle scent of his cologne, that dangerous blend of oud and sandalwood, was more pronounced here, enveloping her. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Mr. Conti," she began, her voice a little shaky but firm. "We need to talk." He slowly lowered his glass, his dark eyes, like obsidian chips, rising to meet hers. There was no surprise, no defensiveness, just a quiet, patient assessment. "Luca," he corrected, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a tremor through her. "Please." "And I agree." She walked further into the room, stopping a respectful distance from him. What happened to my apartment, to that man? It was brutal. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. It was efficient and necessary. Necessary. Emily pressed, her voice gaining strength, a spark of defiance igniting within her. To destroy everything. To send someone to hurt me. Her hand instinctively went to her still tender arm. Luca's jaw tightened, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze unwavering. Emily, you understand now that Thorne is not merely an art dealer. He operates with impunity, using his gallery as a front for far worse. Your small act of defiance, brave as it was, merely exposed you to a danger you could not comprehend. His enforcer was a message. My response was a stronger one. He paused, letting his words sink in. That man will not trouble you again. Nor will Thorne. Their network is currently being reorganized. The cold finality in his tone sent a chill down her spine, yet also a strange sense of profound, unsettling relief. But what about you? Emily asked, her voice softer, laced with a desperate curiosity. Your world. This of violence. Is this how you always operate? Luca's eyes narrowed slightly, a shadow passing over their depths. He rose from the chair, moving with that quiet, almost predatory grace until he stood directly in front of her. He was too close, his towering presence overwhelming, yet she didn't flinch. She needed answers. She needed to understand the man who had irrevocably altered her life. He reached out, his strong, calloused fingers gently lifting her chin, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. The warmth of his touch was startling, an electric current running through her. My world, he murmured, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper, is built on the lessons of betrayal, of seeing beauty exploited, shattered, and then deciding to reclaim it, to protect it, with every means necessary. He released her chin, his hand falling away, but his eyes never left hers. My family, generations ago, they were collectors, patrons of the arts. They believed in the purity of creation. Until arrival, a man like Thorne leveraged their trust, their love for art, to orchestrate a devastating betrayal. My grandfather, a man of honor, lost everything. His gallery, his reputation, almost his life. It taught us a crucial lesson. Emily stared at him, a sudden surge of empathy washing over her. The words, delivered with such controlled intensity, painted a vivid picture of a past wound, a deep-seated scar that had shaped the formidable man before her. A lesson in ruthlessness, she whispered. He nodded, a grim, humorless curve of his lips. In consequence, in ensuring that what is precious is never left vulnerable again, that those who seek to profit from the destruction of beauty, of innocence, they face a reckoning. His gaze softened, just infinitesimally, as it swept over her. Like you, Emily, your art, your passion, your inherent goodness is a beauty that deserved protection, not exploitation. Her heart ached, a tender, unfamiliar longing blossoming in her chest. She saw it then, truly saw it, the man beneath the dawn. A man shaped by loss, driven by a profound, if dark, sense of justice, deeply affected by the defilement of beauty, whether it was an ancient masterpiece or a struggling artist's soul. He wasn't just a brute. He was a broken piece of art himself, hardened by the world. A profound, intimate silence settled between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Emily reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and gently touched his arm. The fabric of his shirt was soft beneath her fingers, but the muscle beneath was hard, unyielding. It was a purely empathetic touch, a gesture of understanding. Luca froze, his breath catching. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened, a flicker of raw vulnerability, of surprise, passing through them. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, a silent question in his gaze. You're not just a monster, Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You're wounded. And you're protecting what you value. His response was slow, deliberate. His free hand, strong and warm, slowly rose, covering hers where it rested on his arm. His thumb brushed gently against her skin, sending a jolt of tender warmth through her. The contact was electric, yet deeply comforting. It was not a sexual touch, not yet, but a profound connection, a shared moment of raw, vulnerable understanding. "And you, Emily," he murmured, his voice rough with an unspoken emotion, "you are proving to be something I value, more than I ever anticipated." Her internal conflicts, the fear, the confusion, began to ease, replaced by a dawning sense of trust, a dangerous, compelling attraction. She was no longer just his captive. She was his confidant, sharing a secret wound. The warmth of his hand, the depth of his gaze, created an undeniable longing within her. She was inextricably bound to this man, a powerful dawn forged in betrayal, and a terrifying, exhilarating part of her knew she wouldn't have it any other way. The line between protector and captor, between fear and fascination, was blurring, dissolving into something far more complex and undeniable. The gilded cage of the penthouse, once a sanctuary, had begun to feel like a pressure cooker. The autumn gala, the supposed unveiling of Emily's special commission, Thorne's grand money-laundering piece to resistance, was mere hours away. For days, the subtle shifts in the gallery's atmosphere had been palpable. Mr. Thorne, usually a master of glacial composure, betrayed flashes of irritation, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting furtively to his phone. Luca's unseen hand, Emily understood, was tightening around Thorne's illicit empire, slowly, relentlessly. The relief she felt at Thorne's discomfort was constantly at war with a growing, suffocating anxiety for her own safety. Luca had been a constant, if distant, presence. He hadn't visited the penthouse since their intimate conversation in the study, but his influence was everywhere. Marco, his silent shadow, ensured her every need was met, from gourmet meals to a fresh supply of art materials, though her heart ached to paint her own truth, not Thorne's lies. Luca's calls were infrequent, always brief, his voice the low, steadying rumble that promised protection, yet hinted at the tempest raging just beyond her gilded walls. Each time he spoke, a tremor of longing and fear would intertwine in her chest. She found herself clinging to his words, to the memory of his touch, a lifeline in a world increasingly fraught with unseen dangers. As the sun began its descent, painting the city in hues of molten gold and bruised violet, Emily stood before the imposing canvas in the penthouse studio. The painting was finished. Technically, on the surface, it was exactly what Thorne desired, grand, intricate, subtly echoing a Renaissance master, yet bearing a contemporary sheen. But deep within its layers, in the faintest of brushstrokes, in the barely perceptible tilt of a figure's head, Emily had woven her own silent rebellion. Tiny, almost invisible acts of artistic defiance, a subversion of Thorne's corrupt vision. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was her. A message chimed on the secure phone Luca had provided. A text from Marco: "Your driver will arrive at 7 p.m. The gala begins at 7:30. Emily's stomach twisted. The gala. The final act of her unwilling complicity. Her internal monologue was a storm of conflicting emotions. Hope, because Luca would be there, a powerful, protective force. Fear, because Thorne was a cornered rat, and cornered rats were the most dangerous. Guilt, for having sunk so deep into this world, for compromising her art. And a strange, potent ache for Luca, for the man beneath the dawn, the one who had seen her wounds and offered, in his own brutal way, to heal them. She chose a simple, elegant black dress that evening, one of the many new garments that had appeared in her closet. It flowed gracefully, discreetly covering the lingering bruise on her arm, a phantom ache, a ghost of Thorne's earlier warning. She pulled her hair back into a sleek, low bun, her face pale but determined. She was ready, or as ready as she could ever be. At precisely 7 p.m., the discreet chime of the doorbell echoed through the penthouse. Emily took a deep, steadying breath. "Coming," she called out, her voice a little shaky. She grabbed her small clutch, inside which she had foolishly, defiantly, slipped a small, coded note detailing Thorne's latest forgeries, a desperate, last-ditch effort to expose him, if all else failed. It was a reckless act, but her artistic integrity, though battered, was not yet broken. She opened the heavy door. Instead of Marco, or one of Luca's usual drivers, a man she didn't recognize stood there. He was tall, powerfully built, with cold, unblinking eyes and a face that seemed carved from granite. He wore a standard black suit, but his presence was anything but standard. It reeked of menace, of unspoken threats. "Miss Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble devoid of inflection. A prickle of unease, sharp and immediate, snaked down Emily's spine. "Yes," she managed, her hand instinctively tightening on her clutch. "Where's Marco?" "Mr. Marco has been unavoidably delayed," the man replied, a subtle, chilling emphasis on the last two words. He offered no apology, no explanation, merely a blank stare. "I am here to escort you to the gala." Emily's heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped against her ribs. This wasn't right. Every instinct screamed danger. I think I'll wait for Marco," she said, attempting to close the door, a desperate, futile gesture. But the man was too fast. His large, powerful hand shot out, pressing against the doorframe, preventing it from closing. His face remained impassive, but his eyes, suddenly devoid of even their initial coldness, became utterly devoid of humanity. "That won't be possible, Miss Carter," he said, and before Emily could scream, before she could even process the words, a thick chloroform-soaked cloth was pressed firmly over her mouth and nose. The cloying, sweet scent of the chemical was immediate, overpowering, suffocating. Emily struggled, her body convulsing, her hands flailing wildly, desperately trying to push him away. Her vision blurred, the elegant penthouse suite swirling into a distorted kaleidoscope of light and shadow. A terrified whimper died in her throat. The note for Luca. It slid from her trembling fingers, falling unnoticed onto the plush rug. Darkness, swift and absolute, consumed her. She awoke to a dull, throbbing ache behind her eyes, the bitter taste of chemicals still clinging to her tongue. Her head swam, a heavy, disorienting fog. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of concrete, stale water, and something metallic, an unsettling blend that prickled her nose and throat. Her wrists were bound, tightly, painfully, behind her back, the rough rope chafing against her skin. A thick, coarse blindfold covered her eyes, plunging her into utter darkness. Disorientation gave way to a fresh wave of terror. Panic, cold and visceral, clawed at her. She struggled, whimpering softly, testing her bonds, but they were unyielding. Her legs, too, felt bound. She was sitting on a cold, hard floor, leaning against an equally cold, rough wall. Each breath was shallow, uneven. Where was she? Who had taken her? A rough voice, familiar in its menace, cut through the darkness, sending a fresh jolt of fear through her. "Awake at last, little artist?" It was Mr. Thorne. His voice, usually so controlled, now had a triumphant, almost manic edge. Emily flinched, instinctively pulling away from the sound. "Thorne," she gasped, her voice hoarse. What do you want?" "What do I want?" He chuckled, a chilling sound in the enclosed space. "Why, I want what's mine, Emily." Your talents. And a little lesson for our mutual friend, Mr. Conthi. "Luca, he'll find me," she whispered, clinging to the name like a desperate prayer. Thorne laughed again, harsh, grating sound. "Oh, he'll find something, I assure you. Perhaps a note. A conveniently placed piece of evidence. Something that makes it look as though you've chosen me. That you betrayed him. A little quid pro quo for his meddling. A cold dread, far more potent than the physical fear, settled in Emily's stomach. Betrayal. The word echoed in her mind, a poison dart. Luca, who had shown her a wounded heart, who had sworn to protect her. Would he believe it? Would he think she had chosen Thorne, chosen the path of lies and corruption? The thought was a devastating blow, far worse than any physical pain. The despair threatened to consume her. She was utterly isolated, vulnerable, convinced that Luca, the one person who could have saved her, might now see her as the enemy. The ultimate vulnerability. Luca Conti stood in the main hall of Thorn Gallery, immaculate in his tailored tuxedo, his presence a dark, powerful anchor amidst the glittering chaos of the gala. The air thrummed with subdued elegance, the clinking of champagne glasses, the muted chatter of the city's elite. Yet, an unsettling sense of unease gnawed at him. Emily should have arrived. Marco had confirmed her driver was dispatched. But her suite was empty, the door ajar, and a quick, efficient sweep had revealed nothing but a faint, lingering scent of chloroform. He held the secure phone to his ear, his fingers tightening, the expensive device feeling suddenly fragile. Marco's voice, usually so steady, was laced with an uncharacteristic urgency. "Don, the driver we sent, he was intercepted. And the penthouse security feed for the last hour, it's been wiped. Clean." Luca's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping violently. Clean. Too clean. A cold, hard fury began to build in his chest, a slow, insidious burn that threatened to ignite into an inferno. Thorn. It could only be Thorn. The cornered rat was finally lashing out. Then a new message flashed on his phone. An unknown number. He opened it, his eyes scanning the single, taunting line of text. It was a grainy photo, dimly lit, but unmistakable. Emily, bound and blindfolded, slumped against a concrete wall. And below it, a message. "Your little artist has chosen her true patron, Don Conti." A shame. Such a fragile beauty, easily broken. Perhaps you should focus on your own affairs. The words hit Luca like a physical blow. Not just the image of Emily vulnerable and terrified, but the implication of betrayal. Chosen her true patron. The icy tendrils of fury that had been creeping through him suddenly exploded, shattering his calm. His hand clenched, the phone groaning under the pressure. A low, guttural growl escaped his lips, the sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw red. He saw betrayal. And he saw Emily, his piccola, in unimaginable danger. Thorn had not just touched what was Luca's. He had dared to hurt her, to threaten her, to try and turn her against him. The insult was devastating, the threat unforgivable. Luca's eyes, usually pools of dark, contained power, now blazed with a cold, terrifying fire. The gala, the elegant chatter, the glittering lights, it all faded into a meaningless blur. The world narrowed to one singular, obsessive focus, finding Emily, and annihilating anyone who stood in his way. He raised his hand, gesturing sharply to Marco, who stood a few feet away, already sensing the shift in his dawn. "Marco," Luca's voice was a low, chilling whisper, utterly devoid of warmth. "Find him. Find Thorn. And tell him he just made the last mistake of his pathetic life." The words were a promise, a vow carved in ice. Emily was gone, and Luca Conti, the ruthless Don, was about to unleash a storm that would leave nothing but ruin in its wake. The cold rage that had simmered in Luca Conti's chest for days finally erupted, a consuming inferno that threatened to scorch everything in its path. The faint glow of the gala lights, the polite murmurs, the clinking of glasses, it all vanished, swallowed by the darkness that now blazed in his eyes. The phone, which had delivered Thorn's taunting message, and the image of Emily, bound and terrified, lay crushed in his hand, a testament to his raw, unchecked fury. He felt a primal, visceral scream clawing at his throat, but the Don did not scream. He acted. "Marco." His voice, usually a controlled rumble, was a whip crack of pure command, cutting through the sophisticated din of the gala. It wasn't loud, but every ear that mattered in the room snapped to attention. Marco, a shadow of loyalty, was by his side in an instant, his own face grim, sensing the unleashed storm. "Find him," Luca hissed, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "Every man, every resource. Sweep the city. Every abandoned warehouse, every safe house, every known associate. Tear this city apart if you have to. I want Thorn, and I want Emily. Now, the last word was a brutal, decisive strike, laced with an urgency that sent shivers through Marco. Within minutes, the Thorn Gallery Gala, carefully orchestrated facade of elegance, began to unravel. Luca's men, previously mingling discreetly among the guests, moved with startling efficiency. Cell phones glowed in the shadows, hushed commands were issued, and sleek black cars, previously parked innocuously, roared to life outside. The underbelly of the city, typically stirring in the dead of night, was abruptly jolted into a frantic, widespread hunt. Luca himself moved with a terrifying, single-minded focus, no longer bothering with a pretense of social graces. He was a force of nature, consumed by a singular, obsessive purpose. He wasn't just the Don, he was the hunter. And his prey had dared to touch what was his. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, the throbbing pain in her head a constant companion. The air was thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something metallic that made her stomach churn. Her blindfold was tight, digging into the bridge of her nose, but she could vaguely discern shifting shadows through the coarse fabric. Sounds, distant, muffled, indistinguishable, echoed around her. The rough, cold concrete against her cheek was a cruel reality. Her heart, a terrified bird, hammered against her ribs. Luca. Would he come? Would he believe Thorn's lie, the insidious suggestion that she had somehow chosen this? The thought was a more profound torment than her physical discomfort. She replayed his words in the study, his vulnerability, his promise of protection. She clung to it, a desperate plea for hope in the suffocating darkness. He sees beneath the surface. He understands the agony. Would he still see her now, amidst the wreckage Thorn had made of her? Or would he see only betrayal? The abandonment, the sheer loneliness of her terror, threatened to consume her. A sudden sharp clang echoed nearby, making her flinch. Then a distant shout cut short. Her breath hitched. Was it them? Or just more of Thorn's goons? A wave of fresh fear washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Lucas stood silhouetted against the pale glow of the warehouse district, the industrial landscape a stark canvas for his unleashed fury. Marco, his face a grim mask, pointed to a dilapidated, unmarked building at the far end of a deserted alley. Thorn's private storage unit. We intercepted a communication. He's there. And Emily. Luca felt a surge of cold satisfaction, quickly replaced by a fresh wave of venomous rage. His eyes, now purely predatory, fixed on the building. No alarms. No warnings, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Silence is paramount. I want him surprised. And I want Emily unharmed. His men, a dozen dark figures moving with practiced, deadly efficiency, fanned out. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion. A door, old and rusting, was breached with a single muffled explosion, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the district. Luca moved first, a dark blur of controlled power, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew, old cardboard, and the metallic tang of fear. He heard her before he saw her. A soft, muffled whimper, raw with pain and terror, echoing from deeper within the sprawling, chaotic space, ignited a fresh spark of savage possessiveness in his chest. Piccolo. He moved faster, his footsteps silent, deliberate. He found her in a small, windowless room, crudely constructed from stacked pallets. Emily, blindfolded and bound, was slumped against a cold concrete wall, her head lolling. Mr. Thorne stood over her, a cruel smirk on his face, a small polished pistol held loosely in his hand. Two other thugs, armed, stood guard. Well done, Conthi, Thorne sneered, his voice surprisingly calm, almost smug. Took you long enough. She was starting to get lonely. He kicked lightly at Emily's bound legs, and a small, pained gasp escaped her. That sound, that small, fragile sound of her pain. It snapped the last vestiges of Luca's restraint. His composure, usually as unyielding as granite, shattered into 1,000 pieces. A profound, unwavering devotion, laced with a fierce, burning need to protect, surged through him. He didn't waste words. He didn't issue threats. His actions were his language. In a breathtaking display of raw, brutal force and strategic brilliance, Luca moved. He didn't rush in blindly. His eyes had already assessed the layout, the positions of Thorne's men. A silent signal, a mere flick of his fingers, and Marco and his crew burst in from the shadows, guns drawn, moving with lightning speed. The two thugs guarding Thorne didn't stand a chance. They were disarmed and neutralized in a matter of seconds, their muffled grunts quickly fading into silence. Thorne, his smug expression instantly replaced by wide-eyed terror, raised his pistol, aiming it wildly at Emily. "Stay back, Conti, or she gets it," he shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation. Luca's eyes, blazing with an almost inhuman coldness, never left Emily. "You touch her," he growled, his voice a low, chilling whisper that promised unimaginable torment, "and I will ensure your suffering is an art form, Thorne. A masterpiece of pain that will outlive your miserable name." He didn't fire. He didn't need to. With a move so swift it was almost invisible, he threw a small, heavy object across the room. It struck Thorne's hand with pinpoint accuracy, the sickening thud of bone against metal. Thorne cried out, dropping the pistol, his fingers spasming in agony. Luca was on him in an instant. He wasn't the sophisticated Don anymore. He was a force of primal, savage rage. He slammed Thorne against the concrete wall, his hand a vice around the man's throat, lifting him clear off the ground. Thorne gasped, his eyes bulging, his face rapidly turning purple. "You thought you could touch her," Luca spat, his voice laced with pure venom. "You thought you could break her. You thought you could make her betray me." His grip tightened further. "She belongs to me. Every piece of her. Her art. Her soul. And no one touches what is mine." Emily, half-conscious, heard his words. The raw possessiveness, the brutal, unwavering claim. The cold fury in his voice was terrifying, but was also a shield, a promise of absolute protection. A wave of overwhelming relief, hot and sudden, washed over her, mingling with her fear. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her bones, that he was here. He hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't believed the lie. Luca held Thorne suspended for a moment longer, his eyes burning into the man's terrified face, before dropping him with a sickening thud. Thorne crumpled to the floor, coughing, gasping, a broken man. Marco stepped forward, a grim reaper in a dark suit, pulling Thorne roughly to his feet. The Don had delivered his message. The rest was for his men. Luca turned, his rage still simmering, but his focus immediately, completely on Emily. He knelt before her, his powerful hands, surprisingly gentle, tearing away the blindfold. Light, harsh, and sudden, flooded her eyes, making her blink rapidly. Her vision cleared, and the first thing she saw was Luca's face. His eyes, though still intense, held a desperate, raw concern, an anguish that mirrored her own. "Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "Are you hurt? Piccola, tell me you're all right." She could only shake her head, fresh tears welling up, tears of profound relief and a dawning, undeniable love. He was here. He had saved her. She saw the dangerous, ruthless Don, yes, but more importantly, she saw the desperate devotion, the man whose world had stopped spinning until she was safe. He swiftly cut her bonds, freeing her aching wrists. As he pulled her into his embrace, his arms strong and encompassing, Emily buried her face in his shoulder, the familiar scent of him, of leather and danger and possessive warmth, filling her senses. She was still terrified, still shaking, but nestled against him, amidst the quiet aftermath of his fury, she felt an ultimate catharsis. She was safe, and Luca Conti, the Mafia Don, had just fought a war for her. And he had won. The transition from the chilling desolation of Thorne's warehouse to the hushed opulence of Luca's penthouse was jarring, a dizzying blur of motion and conflicting sensations. Emily barely registered the journey, her body trembling uncontrollably, her mind a chaotic storm of residual terror and overwhelming relief. Marco had carried her, his formidable strength surprisingly gentle, while Luca, his face still etched at the aftermath of his terrifying fury, walked beside them, his eyes never leaving her. Back in the penthouse, the world seemed to slow. She was led to a lavish bedroom she hadn't seen before, all soft cream and deep forest green, smelling faintly of lavender and Luca's masculine cologne. Hands, gentle and efficient, helped her out of her ruined dress, cleaning the grime and lingering scent of chloroform from her skin. A warm bath, infused with fragrant oils, was drawn, its steam rising in comforting tendrils. She sank into the water, the heat a welcome balm against her aching muscles, but her mind still reeled. Every splash, every echo in the large bathroom, brought back the metallic tang of fear from the warehouse. Luca was a constant presence. He didn't hover, but he was always there. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush robe, he was waiting in the sitting area, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in his hand. His gaze, no longer blazing with cold rage, was now filled with a deep, consuming concern, a possessive tenderness that made her heart ache. "Drink this, Piccola," he murmured, his voice a low, steadying rumble. He sat beside her on the sofa, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, the solid, comforting presence of his body. "It will help you sleep." Emily took the cup, her hands still trembling slightly. The warmth seeped into her, calming the frantic beat of her pulse. She looked at him, truly looked, seeing the subtle lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the faint tension in his jaw that hadn't quite disappeared. The man who had unleashed such brutal, decisive force for her was now a quiet, meticulous caregiver. The contrast was profound, almost overwhelming. "Thorn," she began, her voice hoarse, the name a bitter taste on her tongue. Luca's expression darkened, a swift, almost imperceptible hardening of his features. "Thorn is no longer a concern," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying a chilling finality. "His operations have been permanently dissolved. And he, along with anyone involved in touching what is mine, they have faced their reckoning." He didn't elaborate, and Emily knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the details were far too gruesome for words. Thorn was gone. Permanently. The justice, though brutal and unseen, had been swift and absolute. And for the first time, she felt a profound, if dark, sense of peace regarding her former tormentor. Over the next few days, Emily slowly began to heal, cocooned in Luca's protective bubble. The physical aches subsided, the last vestiges of the chemical haze lifted, but the emotional scars were deeper, requiring more delicate tending. Luca's care was relentless, yet never intrusive. He ensured she was well fed, comfortable, her studio stocked with fresh supplies. He brought her rare art books, played classical music softly in the background, and spent hours in silent companionship, watching her sketch, his presence a quiet anchor in her still turbulent world. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside, painting fleeting patterns on the penthouse windows, Emily finally confronted the storm within her. She was sitting on the plush rug in the living room, a sketch pad in her lap, trying to channel the chaos onto paper. Luca was nearby, reading, his presence a comforting weight. "Luca," she said, her voice soft, but resolute. He immediately looked up, his dark eyes instantly focused on her. "What you did for me." "At the warehouse." He closed his book, placing it carefully on the table. "I protected what is mine." His voice was low, unwavering, infused with that fierce possessiveness that had once terrified her, but now, strangely, felt like the purest form of devotion. "It was terrifying," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion, "to see that side of you. So ruthless, so absolute." He rose, walking towards her, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't. He knelt before her, his gaze unwavering, intense. "My world, Piccola, is not soft. It is brutal. It is unforgiving. I make decisions that protect what I cherish, and sometimes Those decisions require a certain ruthlessness. But it is always for a reason. Always for those I claim. And you claimed me, she whispered, her heart pounding. From the moment I saw you, he admitted, his eyes burning into hers, standing amidst Thorn's lies, so vulnerable, yet so defiant. My claim was absolute, and I will burn the world down to keep you safe. Emily felt a profound shift within her. The fear, the internal conflict, began to dissipate, replaced by a deep, undeniable acceptance. She looked into his eyes, seeing the dark depths of his world, but also the unwavering commitment, the raw, beautiful truth of his devotion. She knew he was dangerous. She knew his world was dark. But for her, he was light. He was safety. He was home. Ah, I saw it, she said, her voice barely audible. The rage, the promise in your eyes. Even when I was terrified, I felt safe. With you, a tear, not of fear, but of profound understanding and love, slipped down her cheek. He reached out, his strong, callous thumb gently wiping it away. His touch was tender, reverent. Then you understand, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. This is our truth, Emily. A dangerous one, but it is ours. And Clara, she asked, a lingering thread of worry. Completely secure, he assured her, his voice firm. Her care is paramount. A dedicated team, the best doctors, a new safe environment. All arranged. She will never be a tool for anyone again. The relief that washed over Emily was immense, liberating. He hadn't just saved her, he had secured her most precious connection. Our future, Luca, she whispered, her heart full. What does it look like in your world? He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, a rare vulnerability flickering in their depths. It looks like this, he said, his voice raw with emotion. It looks like you, free to create, your art soaring. It looks like me, always by your side, a shadow in the light, ensuring no one ever threatens your peace again. It looks like a partnership, Piccola. A commitment. You are not a prisoner here, Emily. You are chosen. You are cherished. And you are mine. Completely. Will you accept that? Will you accept me? Emily looked at him, at the dangerous, beautiful man who had torn down her old world to rebuild it, piece by piece around her. She saw not just the dawn, but the wounded soul, the fierce protector, the man whose love was as absolute as his power. A wave of deep gratitude, profound love, and an unwavering sense of belonging washed over her. Yes, she breathed, her voice firm, resolute. I accept you, Luca. All of you. Your world. Your love. I am yours. He let out a slow, shaky breath, as if he had been holding it for days. Then, with a tender urgency that spoke volumes, he leaned in, his lips finding hers in a deep, consuming kiss. It was a kiss of healing, of acceptance, of a powerful, unspoken vow. The violence, the fear, the desperation, it all faded, replaced by the certainty of their intertwined future. They were bound, irrevocably, by a love forged in darkness, strengthened by defiance, and protected by the unwavering commitment of an obsessed dawn. Emily knew, with a certainty that thrilled her to her core, that her true story, her true art, was only just beginning. Was her broken spirit truly hers, or just a canvas scarred by another's greed? Emily's art was silenced, her dreams caged by a cruel world. But sometimes, it takes a dangerous love to see your true masterpiece. Luca Conti didn't just save her from ruin. He saw her inherent worth, igniting a freedom she thought was lost forever. This story reminds us that being exploited or hurt in the past doesn't define your value. Your scars tell a story of survival, not weakness. You are worthy of a love that fights fiercely for your soul, a love that heals not despite your past, but because it embraces every part of you. If Emily's journey speaks to your heart, if you too believe in finding your strength and claiming your truth, join our community. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of untamed love, and comment, my art, my worth, to affirm your own unbreakable spirit.